It was supposed to be a triumph. The world's most powerful rocket, carrying the dreams of a company that wants to take humans to Mars, lifted off from South Texas into a clear January sky. And for the first 7 minutes, everything went exactly as planned. Then, 8 minutes and 20 seconds into the flight, contact with the spacecraft was lost. A few minutes later, the most capable machine humanity has ever launched broke apart over the Atlantic Ocean, raining debris down onto the islands of Turks and Caicos. SpaceX called it a rapid, unscheduled disassembly. The rest of the world called it an explosion. And for weeks afterward, everyone wanted to know the same thing. What really happened up there? Now, SpaceX and the FAA have answered that question. And the answer is one of the strangest, most technically fascinating failure stories in the history of spaceflight. It was not a software glitch. It was not a faulty weld or a cracked engine part. What destroyed the Starship upper stage on Flight 7 was something called a harmonic response, invisible vibrations that built up during flight to levels several times stronger than anything SpaceX had ever seen in testing. And understanding exactly what that means, why it happened, and what SpaceX did to fix it, tells you everything you need to know about why building a rocket like Starship is so extraordinarily difficult, and why SpaceX keeps doing it anyway. To understand the Flight 7 failure, you first need to understand what Starship actually is and why this mission mattered so much. Starship is the largest and most powerful rocket ever built by any human civilization. The full stack, the Super Heavy booster on the bottom and the Starship upper stage on top, stands 403 feet tall, or about 123 meters. At liftoff, it weighs approximately 5.5 million kilograms, which is around 12 million pounds. It produces more thrust than any launch vehicle in history, including the Saturn V that sent Apollo astronauts to the moon, and it is designed to be completely and rapidly reusable. Both stages returning to Earth to fly again, over and over, driving the cost of access to space down to levels that would make missions to the Moon, Mars, and deep space economically viable for the first time. Flight 7, launched on January 16, 2025, was the 7th test of this extraordinary machine. It was carrying a Block 2 design, an upgraded version of the Starship upper stage with improvements to the structure, the avionics, and multiple other systems. The mission plan called for the Super Heavy booster to separate from Starship after about 3 minutes of flight, return to the launch site at SpaceX's Starbase facility in South Texas, and be caught by the giant mechanical arms attached to the launch tower, a feat SpaceX had already accomplished once before on Flight 5. The Starship upper stage was then supposed to continue burning its 6 Raptor engines to reach a suborbital trajectory, deploy 10 dummy Starlink satellite simulators, coast through space, and splash down in the Indian Ocean about an hour after liftoff. The booster side of the mission went almost perfectly. Super Heavy separated cleanly, executed its boost-back burn to reverse course, and flew back toward Starbase. It made a precise, controlled descent and was caught by the tower's chopstick arms exactly as planned, the second successful booster catch in Starship's history. The crowd watching from the ground erupted. SpaceX engineers in the control room erupted. It was a stunning demonstration of just how far the Starship program had come. Then came Starship. The upper stage lit all 6 of its Raptor engines and began its burn toward space. For about 2 minutes, everything looked good. Then a flash appeared near one of the Raptor engines in the aft section of the vehicle, the rear compartment that SpaceX engineers refer to informally as the attic. The attic is the enclosed space above the engine firewall at the base of the Starship upper stage. It is the area where the propellant feed lines from the main tanks connect to the 6 Raptor engines below. It is a critical, complex section of plumbing, exposed to extreme heat, pressure, and vibration during flight. Immediately after that first flash, SpaceX's telemetry showed a pressure rise in the attic, a sign that something was leaking. About 2 minutes after the first flash, a second flash appeared. Then the fires began. The sustained burning in the attic area caused one by one the Raptor engines to execute controlled shutdown sequences, as their onboard systems detected the worsening conditions. With engines shutting down and the propulsion system failing, Starship's flight computer eventually lost the ability to control the vehicle. Telemetry from the spacecraft went dark just over 8 minutes and 20 seconds after launch. 3 minutes after communications were lost, observers on the ground and on aircraft in the area saw the Starship upper stage breaking apart over the Atlantic Ocean. Debris rained down on the Turks and Caicos Islands. SpaceX, the FAA, and air traffic controllers had pre-planned a debris response area for exactly this kind of scenario, and the fallout stayed within those boundaries. There were no reported injuries to the public. The Turks and Caicos government reported one case of minor property damage. But a mission that had started with such extraordinary promise had ended in a fireball over the Caribbean. Within hours, Elon Musk posted his initial assessment. The preliminary indication, he said, was that there had been an oxygen and fuel leak in the cavity above the ship engine firewall, the attic, that was large enough to build pressure beyond what the venting system could handle. That early statement turned out to be directionally correct. But over the following weeks, SpaceX's engineering teams dug much deeper into the data, and what they found revealed a failure mode that was subtle, unexpected, and deeply instructive. On February 24th, 2025, about 5.5 weeks after the flight, SpaceX released its formal investigation findings. The most probable root cause for the loss of the Starship vehicle, SpaceX concluded, was a harmonic response several times stronger in flight than had been seen during any ground testing. Now, harmonic response is a concept that most people outside of engineering or physics might not immediately recognize, but it is crucial to understanding what went wrong. Every physical structure has what engineers call natural frequencies, specific rates of vibration at which the structure will resonate if excited by an external force. Think of the way a wine glass will ring at a certain musical note when you tap it, or the way a bridge can begin to oscillate dangerously when marching soldiers happen to walk in step with its natural frequency. When a structure is exposed to vibrations at or near one of its natural frequencies, the oscillations can amplify dramatically, far beyond what a simple external force alone would produce. This phenomenon is called resonance, and it is one of the most dangerous enemies of complex mechanical systems. In the case of Starship Flight 7, the propulsion system, the network of engines, fuel lines, valves, and fittings in and around the attic, began to vibrate during flight at a harmonic frequency. This is not unusual in itself. Rocket engines vibrate. The aerodynamic forces on a vehicle moving through the atmosphere at high speed create vibrations. The combustion process inside rocket engines creates pressure oscillations. All of this is normal and expected, and SpaceX had tested for it extensively on the ground. The problem was that the combination of forces during actual flight produced a harmonic response that was several times more intense than anything the ground testing had prepared for. The vibrations were so much stronger than anticipated that they placed stress levels on the propulsion hardware that it was not designed to handle. And under that extreme stress, hardware began to fail. Propellant, the fuel and oxidizer flowing through the lines feeding the Raptor engines, began to leak into the attic. The attic has a venting system designed to handle small amounts of leakage and pressure buildup, but the leak generated by the harmonic stress was too large, too fast. The venting system was overwhelmed. The escape propellant ignited. Fires broke out and sustained themselves in the attic space. The burning spread and intensified, and one by one the Raptor engines detected the deteriorating conditions and executed their shutdown protocols. By the time the last engine shut down, Starship had lost its ability to fly in the flight termination system, activated to end the mission safely within the planned debris area. The entire sequence, from the first flash to the final breakup, unfolded over a matter of minutes in the upper atmosphere, beyond the ability of any engineer on the ground to intervene. What happened next is arguably the most impressive part of the whole story. SpaceX did not wait for the FAA investigation to conclude before beginning to fix the problem. The company's engineers identified the harmonic issue and started designing solutions almost immediately after the flight. The critical tool they used was an extended static fire of the Starship vehicle already being prepared for Flight 8. On February 12, 2025, just under 4 weeks after the Flight 7 failure, SpaceX fired the Flight 8 Starship's 6 Raptor engines for a full 60 seconds on the ground, deliberately recreating the conditions that had caused the Flight 7 failure. Engineers tested multiple engine thrust levels in 3 separate hardware configurations in the Raptor vacuum engine feed lines, specifically to reproduce the problematic harmonic response and then validate that their fixes had eliminated it. This kind of ground test, deliberately designed to break things in a controlled environment so you understand the failure mode before flying again, is exactly how serious aerospace engineering is supposed to work. By the time SpaceX submitted its final mishap report to the FAA, the company had identified and implemented 11 corrective actions targeting the harmonic vibration problem and its downstream effects. The FAA reviewed and verified every one of those 11 actions. Specifically, the fixes included strengthening and reinforcing the propulsion hardware in the attic to withstand higher stress levels, design modifications to reduce the intensity of the harmonic vibrations themselves, revisions to the engineering models used to predict vibration behavior, models that had clearly underestimated the real-world harmonic response during Flight 7, hardware improvements to the propellant lines and fittings to reduce the risk of leakage under stress, and software updates to the engine control systems for better performance under high vibration conditions. The pre-flight testing protocols were also expanded to better simulate the actual flight environment before any future vehicle leaves the ground. On March 28, 2025, the FAA officially closed the mishap investigation. The agency announced it publicly on March 31st, confirming that SpaceX had implemented all corrective actions and that return to flight had been cleared. This closed the book on Flight 7 from a regulatory standpoint, and throughout all of it, SpaceX's timeline of getting back to flight was remarkable. Flight 8 launched on March 6, 2025, less than 7 weeks after the Flight 7 explosion. The pace at which SpaceX identifies a catastrophic failure, investigates it thoroughly, designs and implements fixes, tests those fixes, and returns to flight is unlike anything seen in the history of government-run space programs, where similar mishaps have grounded vehicles for months or years. This speed is both SpaceX's greatest asset and its most controversial characteristic. Local residents living near Starbase and near the debris footprint in the Caribbean were understandably alarmed. The Turks and Caicos Islands government had to coordinate debris recovery efforts. Local officials expressed frustration about delays in communication from SpaceX immediately after the explosion, and critics have pointed out that the pace of SpaceX's iterative development approach, flying hardware as fast as possible, finding problems in real flight and fixing them quickly, means that failures in the actual flight environment are effectively part of the design process. This approach is faster and cheaper than traditional aerospace development, where massive amounts of analysis are done to try to anticipate every failure mode before anything ever flies. But it produces more dramatic failures in the real world, even if those failures are contained within planned safety zones and result in no public harm. SpaceX has always been transparent about this philosophy. After Flight 7, the company posted directly, Starship's 7th flight test was a reminder that developmental progress is not always linear, and putting flight hardware in a flight environment is the fastest way to demonstrate how thousands of distinct parts come together to reach space. That philosophy is the reason Starship has progressed further, faster than any comparable development program in history. It is also the reason that debris from a 400-foot rocket occasionally falls into the Caribbean. The Flight 7 investigation ultimately revealed something important about the nature of complex engineering systems. Even the most rigorous ground testing cannot perfectly replicate every condition a rocket will experience in actual flight. The combination of vibration frequencies, aerodynamic forces, engine thrust levels, and propellant pressures that a rocket encounters during the real ascent profile is extraordinarily difficult to reproduce on the ground. Harmonic responses in particular, the resonant vibration of interconnected structures, can behave very differently in flight than in ground tests, because the real-world dynamic loading conditions are so much more complex. What SpaceX encountered on Flight 7 was not a failure of